Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
Infrastructure. So I have to start with this. Amy is going to drive you nuts, but I've been in this business for long enough so that when I began in this business, we did everything with index cards. We really did. And here's why I start there. Not because I want you to think about how old I am, though I am, but because while we have all of this remarkable technology and these remarkable systems around which and through which we all live, it used to be possible, and I'm sure it still is possible, to conduct a campaign with very simple means, right? If we had to go back to index cards, I'm not advocating it. I just want to remind everybody that all of this newfangled stuff that we have does in fact make our lives easier and enables us to do things that perhaps we couldn't do with index cards. But when we used index cards, what we could do was to focus intensely on the people, right? And as we have systems that enable us to handle many more people and many more files and organize them, I think the challenge of that is that sometimes we forget that those names are all people. So I just want to sort of set that as a reminder that in the old index card days, we did remarkable capital campaigns. And now we should be able to do even more remarkable campaigns. Right?
I think it's such a wonderful image, Andrea, honestly, because it has been a long time since the index cards days, because my first campaign ever at Rutgers University.
Tico, could you mute whatever you're doing, please?
Oh, and now I was muted. Yeah, I think it's great, Andrea. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you. I think I did that by accident.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Anyways, so I was just saying it's such a great image to have that of the index cards. My first campaign at Rutgers, we were getting rid of the card catalogs and replacing them with computer terminals. But I think, thinking about shuffling index cards or having those file drawers literally filled with donor files as opposed to the electronic versions we all have here today. So I'd love to turn it over to the chat and hear what kind of systems and infrastructure and technology, anything you think of, what are you using? And when you're chatting in, please do use the little blue drop down to write to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your responses. But I would love to know, what do you think of when we talk about building infrastructure for your campaign? What kind of systems do you need? What kind of tools do you look for? What are you using?
So this is funny from Gary Bukowski. He says, Buck Smith used to have index cards that he carried with him all over the country. And he called those folks when he was in their town, one of the developers of Moves Management. Right. It just, it's so interesting to think about how far we've come. And on one hand, the wonder of that. And on the other hand, how sometimes we don't make maximal use of those systems. I mean, Amy, how many organizations have you worked with that have Salesforce or one of these robust systems, which you can do so much with in terms of CRM, and then you find that the person who's running it can do only a tenth of the capacity, right? They can look up names or they can pull predetermined reports, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the frustrations that we have all these incredible systems. They are seldom used effectively. And in fact, I'm not sure that organizations do a very good job of teaching other people in the organization to use the system. So that's sort of a general complicating factor.
Yeah, so I love it. We're getting several in the chat box names of CRMs that people are using. And yes, I think when you talk about and think about infrastructure, certainly your donor management system, your CRM, is one of the tools. Somebody else is suggesting, Christine is suggesting the old-fashioned gift chart, which I wouldn't say is old-fashioned. I mean, that's old and new all at the same time. We need it, absolutely. But I think we're talking about so much more than simply a donor CRM when we think about building infrastructure for your campaign. So I want you to really think about beyond the donor CRM. That's certainly one tool, but we want to think about everything from your committee infrastructure to staffing to communications and campaign reporting. So, Andrea, what do you think about when we talk about building infrastructure for a campaign? Take us far and wide for a minute.
Yeah. So let me say that I am not particularly expert in internal systems building. So I'm going to leave that to you and to you folks on the line like Derry Derringer and Gary Bukowski and a few others of you who really understand internally how organizations run and what kind of systems and management and structures you need to put together there. I know a fair amount about putting together campaign structures, right? I really believe in putting together a system of ad hoc committees, which in some way is like management. Now, it's how the work of the campaign gets done. And I see that we have a good question from Patty. We'll get to it soon about campaign committees. But keep in mind that one of the reasons that successful campaigns work well is because you pay a lot of attention to process, not just to asking people for money, but to process, to engaging people, to involving people, to make people feel as though the campaign is theirs. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is to put together a series of ad hoc committees that have to be well organized, well structured, and that becomes part of the infrastructure of your campaign. Now, there are a whole bunch of other things that need to happen. And the kinds of things I would think about are campaign reports. As you get more and more volunteers working on your campaign, how are you going to report to them all? How are you going to let them know, both within their small group and for the larger campaign, about the campaign progress? Whose job is it going to be to do that? How are you going to do that? I mean, from the simplest thing, let's say you have an ad hoc committee and everybody has assignments. All right, how are you going to let people know that some people on the committee have done their assignments and some haven't? How do you do that in a gentle but efficient and effective way? What kind of reports do you write that sort of nudges the people who haven't done their work yet without turning them off, and applauds the people who have done their work? That's a good management question, right? I mean, it's even a management question that Amy and I deal with in the Capital Campaign Toolkit, right? How do we build a team? We now have 12 people on the Toolkit staff. How do we build a team so that everybody feels like they're part of a great winning team? Everybody's having fun. Everybody gets the information they need, right? It's the same thing with any business, that you need to understand how to be communicating with people. And that is even more important when it comes to a capital campaign, because these people are mostly just volunteers, right? They can walk off if you don't do that well. So I actually like that as an interesting campaign infrastructure challenge, right? How do you report on campaign progress globally, sort of big? Who do you report to? When do you report to them? And then how do you report to small groups, right? How do you recognize people and celebrate when something great has happened, right? All of that is really infrastructure and management, isn't it, Amy?
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, one of the things that has enabled us to do this in a highly effective and efficient way is technology. And so on the one hand, you are able to communicate with basically the push of a button with a wide variety of apps and platforms to all of your campaign volunteers and your donors. But the one thing I would caution you about, as we have moved away from the index card world that Andrea fondly remembers, is to make sure that you're being personal and that you are connecting one-on-one, so that you're not completely relying on a blast email or blast texts or however you're communicating. So I think that integrating both the efficient, the effective use of technology that you have at your fingertips, but also making sure that you are being specific and personal outreach to those people that you're working with and that you want to be actively involved in your campaign. If they just feel like they're one of many that you're texting out to the same message week after week, they may not be so apt to respond. So anyways, all right.
Jerry has just posted a nice piece in the chat talking about various infrastructure things that you need to pay attention to. Let's just highlight a couple of those. And thank you, Jerry, for your thoughtful post here. So your donor database needs to be ready to handle campaign activities. Now, let's actually pause there for a minute, because, in my experience, and this isn't from the old days, this is from today too, many organizations can't get their databases to work well. Do you say data or data, Amy?
Data.
Their databases to work well for their campaigns. So what we see is that organizations run their campaign on spreadsheets and then have to put everything back into the database, right? There's got to be a way to talk to your database people to find out, well, what do we need to see? Let's do it so that we don't have to do double entry, right? That's just a silly waste of time. So, Derry, you point to something I think really important. In terms of making sure your database is ready to handle campaign activities. And there should be data entry protocols and processes, quick campaign reporting, moves management capacity, reconciliation process. This is all from Derry. Thank you so much. And good data hygiene. Oh, that's so funny. It's so true, but it makes me laugh to think about data hygiene. I think about brushing my teeth, right? So then Derry goes on, your internal communications processes and platforms are reviewed and aligned to clearly and consistently inform and update your staff. That's all terrific. Derry, is this the kind of work you do? Do you help people with this kind of infrastructure stuff? If so, we should encourage people to talk to you. Derry Derringer he's a consultant out of Virginia, I think. Are you out of Virginia, Derry? I think so. Anyway, you have a wonderful grasp of the detail of how to do this material, and we really appreciate it. Okay.
All right, let's look at some of the questions that are pouring in. We can circle back to this infrastructure topic if people want to as we move through the hour today. Maggie says, I'm working on several grant applications for our campaign. One foundation who's very excited about our work asks specific questions about our top donors and asking us to identify our top 8. How do we provide this information while honoring donor privacy policy? So Maggie, I don't know what your donor privacy policy says, but presumably you are also recognizing your donors publicly. So if you are recognizing your donors publicly, unless they've asked to be anonymous and confidential, then I would think that there is not an issue. I mean, I don't know how much detail the foundation's asking for, but you may list, the top 10 gifts over $100,000. And, if you're publicizing that on your website or on plaques, it may not be confidential information. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with, let's say you have 8 donors, 2 of whom have requested anonymity. So in your report to the board, you put an asterisk saying these donors have requested to be anonymous. That's fine, right? If the foundation pushes back, then you're going to go to those donors and ask, would it be okay if we shared your name just with this foundation? So I think it's a wonderful question to ask, Maggie. I'm glad you did, because it's not uncommon that a foundation or sometimes a financial institution wants to know who your top donors are. If you're borrowing, if you're doing bridge financing in a community where everybody knows everybody, a financial institution is going to want to know who has committed the money. Are they a safe bet?
Right.
So it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that other donors are entitled to know that you've raised a significant portion of the money before they make their commitment, or that other community leaders are involved. So it's all good. All right. So, Chris, I need you to expand on your question, and we'll circle back to you. Designing the color website of the campaign. I'm not exactly sure what you mean there. I guess you would use your logo colors or whatever your organizational colors there. Why don't you expand on that a little bit? Patty's asking, any good tips to get our cabinet for our campaign committee, our capital campaign, re-energized to reach the next goal of our campaign? It's already hard enough to keep them engaged being on Zoom and not in person. They've made really great progress thus far, but now, all right. So Patty wants to know, how are we going to get our campaign volunteers and our committees re-engaged as we're slogging through the campaign?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, because campaigns do feel like slogs. They really do. These are long, right? And when you have a committee, like a lead gift committee, that goes for pretty much the whole duration of the campaign, right? I mean, that doesn't stop until the end. It is a really interesting and important challenge to think about how to keep those people excited. So one of the things that I would say is sort of a theoretical idea, which is that I don't think anything does particularly well in straight lines, right? It's not the way things happen in nature. It's not the way things grow. It's not the way we function. We don't function with a steady energy. We go in ebbs, we go in ebbs and flows. And I think it's actually wise to think about running your campaign committees that way. To really have, there's a word for this. Maybe it will come back to me, but it's sort of heats, if you will. That's not the one I'm hunting for. But let's say that you have 2 months where you're going to say, listen, in the next 2 months, we've got an immediate and pressing goal. In the next 2 months, we want to raise so and so much money. And then we're going to sit back for a while and rekindle our spirits. And as we do that, here are some fun things we might do. And then you might pick up again. So you actually, if you could thoughtfully design the flow of your campaign committees so that they have natural times of people sitting back and natural times of people really stepping forward and an intense effort. By such and such, we want to close 10 gifts, right? And then this gets back to the question of how do you report to those people? So if during that sprint, if you will, you actually are reporting to people every other day, right, on who has made what progress, it's going to feel like something that's exciting. And when you get to that interim goal, right, we want to close $100,000 in the next 10 days. Then if you can get it so that people close $100,000 of gifts or whatever the number is in the next 10 days, then you do something to celebrate. Right. So you have to create ebbs and flows and opportunities to celebrate in the middle of this long 24, 18, 24, 36 month period when this committee stays together. Right. It's a creative challenge. And in fact, you could probably invite 1 or 2 people on the committee to help you think about it. Right, to help you think about ways to get people to celebrate. Now, that doesn't end. That's sort of a planning approach to it. But what do you do when your committee's tired? What do you do? Let's hear from you. What do you do? I'm sure you've all had tired committees. Have you found good solutions?
So Jim says, we recently brought in an outside expert to assist in training the members of our campaign steering committee. And they did a great job and energized them. So that, certainly that's one possibility. We'd love to hear from others in the chat box. What do you do to re-energize and engage your campaign committee members as you're going through this campaign? I think, certainly ebbs and flows. My recommendation is, don't have a meeting just for the sake of meeting, right? You don't want to drain your campaign volunteers that way with reporting out. If you have something to discuss or a decision to be made, or if they're reporting back to you, certainly that's a better way.
Amy, I just remembered, I don't know why I forgot this, because it really is one of my favorite things to have done ever and to do. I believe in silly awards. Again, it takes some creativity. I've pushed this in a variety of ways, but I think you can actually create certificates, online certificates that you give to people, recognizing them for what they've done. So, for example, if Susan Smith has never solicited a gift before and she agreed to serve on the campaign committee, and she had the courage to solicit a gift, even if the person said no, you could give her an award for courage.
Yes.
Right. Or you could give someone an award for having made the most contacts with the most donors over the last 2 weeks. Or you can make up silly things that accurately reflect what people have done, are tremendously powerful. So, and I just want to lean on that a little. It doesn't work if you give everybody a Volunteer of the Week award. It works if you say, Amy, I'm going to give you an award for the most thoughtful note writer. The most thoughtful thank you note writer, right? Well, Amy knows that recently we've sent out a bunch of Toolkit coffee mugs to our clients and our consultants and to me. And each one of them had a personal note from Amy. And the notes were thoughtful and terrific. And if I gave her that award, right, if I made a special little award for her, it would hit home because she knows she did that.
And so, I want everybody to pay attention. We didn't just focus on the biggest solicitor, right? So it's not just the person who brings in the most money that gets the gift or the award. Andrea, one of her first comments was the person who made the most calls in the last 2 weeks, right? So really focus on things that everybody can do and feel good about. So the most thoughtful note writer, the person who sent out the most emails or made the most phone calls or had a great meeting. And even celebrate the no's, because you won't have a successful campaign if you don't get any no's. It will probably mean you're not asking enough. So celebrating courage and the sort of the, I don't know, bounce backiness, what's the word?
Resilience.
Resilience.
I like bounce backiness better, actually, but resilience is the word you were looking for. To overcome getting a no. Say, listen, right. Our campaign won't be successful if some of you don't get no's, because that means that we're not asking for enough gifts. So we're going to give an award for the resilience to be able to go back and the courage. So I love that. Right. Years and years ago, I ran a concert series. It was my hobby to run a concert series. And I populated the whole thing with volunteers. Volunteers did everything. It was great fun, a lot of work, but 8 weeks running and every summer I ran a concert series. And at the end of the concert series, I gave awards to everybody. I worked really hard on those awards. My favorite award was that one of the volunteers was the person who turned on and off the lights. Right. For the, between the intermission, flick the lights to get people to sit down. And I gave him the Flasher Award.
The Flasher Award. That is great. Oh, thank goodness. Cammie likes my bounce backiness. Yes. Okay, good. Excellent. All right. So
Pam, I like your idea of cocktail, having social time and celebration time with no work, only social. I think that is important that we do that. I really do.
All right. So let's go to Gary's questions/comments. Have you found that sometimes people get more involved with the systems than really relating to their donors? So this is taking us back to infrastructure. So I think, Gary, you're probably referring to staff primarily who get sort of tied up in systems and infrastructure of a campaign and then avoid going out and talking to their donors. So, I think that this is a common misstep, actually, is that people hide behind the infrastructure and the systems. We're not ready. We need more systems. We need more infrastructure. And so I think that is a real fear. But so how do you find that balance, right? How do you make sure that your systems and your infrastructure are set up well enough? I love the expression progress, not perfection. Right? So all at the toolkit, I'm always thinking, how do we make progress, even if it's not perfect? We're going to put out a podcast. Have we perfected podcasting? No, but guess what? Good news. We've got a podcast. I think that's a perfect time to ask you right now, right here. I want everybody, take out your phones. So most of you know, we just launched a podcast last month. It's called All About Capital Campaigns. So if you could, we're going to take a break right now. Get out your devices, click on your podcasting app, look up All About Capital Campaigns. And if you would subscribe and give us a 5-star rating, we would appreciate it so, so much. And I love Susan saying in the comments, better isn't better than good enough, I think, right? Is that driving home my point, I hope? So progress, not perfection. So that goes to Gary, if you're going to wait forever to make sure your systems and infrastructure is just right before starting a campaign, you'll never start the campaign until you go start talking to donors. So I do appreciate that.
Amy, I love the topic of perfection. And I often think to myself that perfection is overrated, right? Because nothing is perfect. Honest to goodness, it may seem perfect when you do it, and then something changes in the outside world, and guess what? It's not perfect anymore. Right? And I often sort of struggle with the notion of being professional. Now, that's not to say that I don't think we should know what we're doing. We should know what we're doing. We should do it as well as we possibly can. But to do it sort of buttoned up and professional loses the energy of it, right? When we write in a way that is professional, it's boring, right? Wouldn't you much rather hear us talk about, what was the phrase you used?
Yeah, progress, not perfection. I don't know.
No, that's not the one. Bounce backiness. Wouldn't you rather hear bounce backiness?
Yeah. Yes. I love it. Of
course you would.
Yes.
It would catch your attention. So the notion of having everything buttoned up is way overrated. It does a couple of things. First of all, it's boring. Second of all, it makes you defensive, right? If you are trying to be perfect in what you put out, if you're trying to have everything exactly right, then when something is not right, and I promise you it won't be, instead of being able to say, thanks so much for letting me know, let's figure out what could be better, you're going to say, how dare you criticize what I've done? And that shift in stance is huge. So we've been thinking about campaign mindset. It's actually another Gary's brilliance is he suggested we think about what is it to be in a campaign mindset. And one of the things to be in a campaign mindset is to be willing to put things out there that leave you a little bit vulnerable. And if you do that, actually, committees will be more interesting and exciting, right? Everyone's going to feel like they're on a tightrope, that they're on a wire with you. So don't worry about being perfect.
Right. You have to get it out. So give yourself a deadline, right? Work on it as much as you can, and then say, all right, after a week, after 2 days, after a month, whatever it is, wherever I'm at, because it's never going to be exactly what you want it to be. And so, yeah. So Maggie's adding perfection is the enemy of progress, right? By Winston Churchill, attributed to him. And Anne is adding, even Ina Garden says, fine is good enough, right? I love that. Fine is good enough. So
you remember Julia Childs, who when she dropped things on the floor, as long as it wasn't there for more than 60 seconds, she'd pick it up and put it back.
Right. Anybody who has kids knows the 5-second rule, right? If it hits the floor for less than 5 seconds, scoop it up and eat it.
Right.
All right. So we've gotten several comments about re-energizing committee members. David saying he would take a moment to remind the team about all the successes they've achieved, the number of donors, the number of gifts, the number of new donors, the impact will be of a successful campaign. Somebody else a little bit earlier in the chat said, bring in testimonials, bring in clients, bring in stories. So, every few campaign meetings, you can liven things up with success stories, with individual testimonials.
So I want to get to Cammie's question, and then I want to get to back to Chris Duane, because I do have a suggestion for him. So Cammie has asked this question. It's maybe oversimplistic, but we are genuinely starting from nothing other than past donations. How does one evaluate a donor's giving capacity? Right. Well, isn't that a wonderful question, right? You all are starting from past donors, right? That's where you begin. You look and see who's given to you in the past. And you may only know that they give you $100 a year and that they have for quite a while. But it is possible to look and see whether they've given away more to other organizations. There are a variety of ways to learn about people. My favorite way, honestly, to learn about people is to ask them about themselves, right? There's nothing like talking to people about themselves. But the way let's say you have 1,000 donors and you don't know anything about them and they've all given you relatively small gifts because you've never asked for anything bigger. How do you can't go to 1,000 people and ask about them. So I would look, if you're in a community, I would look and see where they are giving to other organizations and at what level. Right? Much of that is public information. So people tend to give in habitual ways. And if you see that people are giving larger gifts to other organizations, that's a fairly simple way of beginning to sort your list at a very basic level. You can do, screenings, donor screenings. You can pay for services. There are many things you can do. But this is simple, and this is like going back to card, right? Index cards, right?
Yeah.
But so let's go back to the index card moment where you're looking to find out what they've given to other organizations. And then you share that list with the people who sit on your board or your committees. And you say, okay, what do we know about these people? Let's gather some information. And then you sort out, let's say 10 of them, because they may have the capacity to give more. And you go start talking to them. And you start asking them questions about themselves and why they're interested and why they've been giving and what they like to do and whether they have any suggestions about who you should be talking to and whether they play a role in your campaign. What you find is that if you are genuinely interested in people and are not just asking as a ploy to get their money, but you really are interested, they'll be interested in you, right? They'll be happy you asked and they'll be interested in you.
Yeah, so I want to drive that point home. So, one of the places that lots of organizations start with, which is fine and appropriate, is to do some wealth screening. You might as well use the services that are at your disposal and do some wealth screening. But that is just a starting point. And, it's not perfect. And so some of the data you will get back will not be for that John Smith that you hope it's for. And so, that's where the confusion lies some of the time. And so that's why going to speak to people is absolutely critical. But it is a starting point. It may surface some people that you had no idea had some resources or that you should be having conversations with. But, Andrea's right. Talking to your committee members, talking to your donors, is the number one way that you're going to find out if they're interested, if they're engaged, if they have the capacity, by sitting down and having those conversations. One thing that I would add is perhaps sending a survey, right? See who responds. How are you going to engage with people? So if you are starting with a large list, see whose attention you can grab, see who really cares about your organization, and then start whittling them down that way. But there's nothing like talking to people in your community, doing some simple research like Google searches, looking at similar or large organizations in your community to see who they're highlighting in terms of their donors and see if there's overlap with your donors.
Amy, the idea of sending a survey or host or having small events that you invite a lot of people to and see who shows up, I always categorize that under the heading of fish food.
Yeah.
Right? And fish food is where you have a lot of people. You don't know who's interested, and you put out something that people might be interested in. And those folks who respond are like they're swimming up and nibbling fish or nibbling the fish food, right? They're indicating to you that they're hungry, that they're interested in learning more. And having people self-select is a wonderful thing. That gives you a great place to start. So let's say you send out, 250 invitations, and you get 15 people who sign up. Now, you might think of that as a failure. I think of that as a success, right? Because who am I interested in? I'm interested in the 15 people who are interested enough to respond. Now I have something to work with. Let's get to know those people and see who they are, find out why they're interested. So these things are, I think it's easy to get discouraged about things you shouldn't be discouraged about. You think, oh, well, we had, 235 people who didn't respond. All right, we have 15 people now. Here we go.
And listen, Andrea is using the words events, but we're using them loosely here in COVID. So it can be virtual events. It can, we're aware that we're not having events.
Gatherings. Don't get-togethers.
Yeah, don't take Andrea literally.
Right. That's right.
Take her figuratively sometimes, right? So whatever response you're looking for from people.
All right. So I want to talk about Chris, what the topic that Chris has raised. I want to talk about it in a bigger perspective of sort of logos and identities for campaigns. And there's something interesting to think about here, which is that most campaigns are over and above. They are special fundraising initiatives over and above your regular fundraising. Now, it's not always the case, but in many campaigns, it's the case. And when that is the case, you would be well served to have a special and distinct logo and a brand identity for your campaign that is not the same as the identity for your organization. And the colors may or may not be the same, or the colors may be the complementary colors to your organization's logo. I honestly wouldn't worry about the psychology of colors. There's a huge amount to know about that, I'm sure. But honestly, for the purposes of your campaign, it's not going to make much of a difference whether people respond better to orange or blue. It isn't going to matter all that much. What matters is that you get the image so that it conveys something, and that for the purpose of your campaign and all of your materials, you are actually using something that distinguishes it from the branding from your organization in an ongoing way. And I think that's something we haven't talked about before, Amy.
Yeah. But I would add, let's circle back to progress, not perfection, because Chris's question here is that the committee is stuck. Literally, you're saying that it's a stumbling point for us.
Right. And, here's what to do. Do Las Vegas voting. Right? Do some kind of a voting system. I'm sure you can set up some kind of a voting system where you come up with a process where people you're just gonna make a decision. You have to get a system by which you can make a decision. Right? The reason people are battling about what the colors should be is because they don't want to have to go out and ask for money. Right? Probably.
Right. So give yourself, 3 days.
Right.
send out the 2 or 3 options. Hopefully you've hired a graphic designer, whether it's a student in art school or a professional or on one of these websites where you can hire somebody for $50 to do a logo. Once you have 2 or 3 versions, then send them out and you've got 24 hours to vote and move on, because you're wasting time not raising money by discussing the logo. So, all right, excellent. Okay.
All right. Brenda is interested in how many people have had regular Zoom events or gatherings during COVID. So my guess is that a lot of people have moved their events to virtual events, is my guess. Are they effective? That's interesting.
Yeah. So in the chat box, why don't you let us know? One thing that's worked well for your Zoom meetings, for your virtual events, for your committee meetings. I mean, Andrea and I set up the toolkit to work with capital campaign committees, chairs, executive directors, development directors on Zoom, remotely, virtually, long before COVID started. We at the toolkit truly believe in leveraging technology to be effective and affordable. And the reality is, we don't think it's second rate and we're only doing this because of COVID. We think using Zoom to gather people together is even more effective frequently than putting them in the same room. People don't have to travel. They can show up for an hour. Now, there's a time and place for in-person meetings, but we have found that it is even more effective to gather as long as you're prepared to run a really efficient meeting, which is really no different than in person. You should be prepared, have an effective agenda, make sure that you include everybody in participating. In Zoom, it takes a little extra paying attention to call on people and go around the room and make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. We could go on and on about Zoom meetings. We certainly have in past calls, and I'm sure Andrea will add something. The final thing I'll say is, though, I was just on a committee call the other day. I wasn't facilitating. And the facilitator said, does anybody have anything to add? And of course, nobody spoke up. And if he had called on people by name, everybody would have had something to say. But by just generically saying, are there any thoughts? It's not an effective way to tease out in person or in Zoom participation. So you do want to be thoughtful about that. Andrea, I'm sure you have things to add. What do you want to add to that?
We could do a whole session again on Zoom and how to facilitate meetings. I want to highlight what Melissa Kerbel has said here. Melissa's also a consultant. Melissa, I think I saw your announcement of your new consulting business. Congratulations. That was exciting to see. So she says that she's recently moderated a program on successful virtual fundraising for women in development. And they lowered their goal, but did really well. And they have a much broader, more global audience. So that caught my attention, a broader, more global audience. What we have found in the toolkit, because we were set up to be a virtual company, is that as with these calls, our geographic limits are limitless. Right? We are no longer local or regional, right? The only thing that limits our geography is that we have to know what we're doing. And there are some countries where we honestly don't know what the fundraising practices are. So we can't function. We can't help people in countries where we don't understand how fundraising works. Beyond that, our geographic limitations are gone. And it takes a while to understand that. So you might have always thought about yourself as a local organization. Now, all of a sudden, you have an opportunity to question whether you really have to be a local organization, or whether you could develop programs that actually had a much bigger reach than you currently have. And I think that's a very interesting issue for a lot of people. I'll give you an example. one of the people who took our mini campaign course, the last round, works for a private school that has a very interesting and specific way of teaching math. And they decided that they were going to put together a series of videos, of math tutorial videos. Well, it's a school in a small town. They had always thought about themselves as serving this California community. All of a sudden, they have a product that they are selling nationwide, right? It was totally upended their sense of themselves and brought in a whole new revenue stream because they could reach anybody, anywhere as easily as they could reach the people next door. So it can be jarring if you let yourself look at that. You open your eyes to the possibilities. It's amazing. Okay.
Now, of course, remember, we're assuming that you're registered in all states and you have the authority to fundraise across state and country lines. So, we're not talking about registration and taxes right now. But yes, but it gives you a much broader reach, right? All right.
Let's see.
Let's circle back to infrastructure. Let's sort of bring our conversation full circle back to infrastructure for just the last few minutes. So if anybody has any final thoughts or questions on infrastructure, anything that we said at the beginning of this talk that you've had an aha moment. So I think though, I think the key takeaways for me today, for sure, are about progress, not perfection. You need to identify what you need for systems, infrastructure, staffing, communication with your volunteers, having effective meetings so that volunteers want to show up and they aren't bored. So re-engaging your volunteers and doing creative, interesting things, and really making sure that you're thinking about your campaign infrastructure before you jump off into the deep end of the pool. One of the things that Andrea, you always talk about in terms of setting a campaign up for success is thinking about the plan in advance and not just willy-nilly going out and asking people for donations. I actually had a call from somebody today and he says, we're a year and a half into our campaign of a $5 million goal and we've raised $750,000. And my heart just sank for him because we know that campaign strategy says that you will raise the bulk of the money in the first year or year and a half. A year and a half into a campaign, you need to be more than 50% or closer to 70 or 80% towards your goal because you are raising the biggest gifts first. And so if you have no infrastructure, if you have no systems, if you have no strategy in place, it is going to be seriously problematic for your campaign. So I felt sad for him. They had raised less than $1 million. They're halfway through the timeline for their campaign. They're trying to raise $5 million. That's a big red flag that they're not going to get to their goal, that they hadn't done their planning and their thought process. So I'm going to let you talk about planning and thinking about it. But first, I'm just going to remind everybody that here at the Toolkit, one of the main things that we do is have a team of expert campaign advisors who help our clients plan for and get ready for campaigns and make sure that you have the infrastructure, the systems, the plan in place to be able to run a successful campaign and that you're not just jumping into it willy-nilly. So Andrea, your turn. I'll stop.
So I want to pick up on this. We have a comment here in the Q&A box saying that thoughtful design is an asset to successful fundraising, and I just want to put an exclamation mark on that. while I don't want anyone to get lost in a long, fruitless conversation about whether it should be purple or red or whatever the color should be, I am a total believer in the value of good design and the fact that good design is a profession. That designers, you should hire designers to do a really good job of developing your materials, right? Thoughtful design really is an asset to successful fundraising. Thoughtful design is an asset to everything, if you ask me. So I'm a true believer in that. And I don't think that you should shortchange the design process. Right. With good design, things set up well on the page so you can read them better. With good typeface choices, right, you can read them better. But honestly, people who serve on fundraising committees probably aren't expert in any of that. So I would, I think it's truly important. And if you get a really good designer, then you need to keep your committee in hand, right? So that they don't decide that they know better than the designer knows. That's the challenge, right? Because people often think they do. So thank you for your comment and a reminder. I am such a believer in the value of good design, and particularly now when we live in such a visual communications world. It used to be that people read big blocks of text, right? That we actually read books, though I am reading a book now. But people read big blocks of text. They would read a 40-page report. They would read a 5-page case for support. Now people look at things, they glance at things. They don't actually read them. So design becomes far more important than it used to be. So by all means, be sure that you have a budget and that you have really good talent that you're bringing in to design your campaign materials. Mary Jo has asked a question about that, about logos and comprehensive campaigns or separate looks for different things. Typically, Mary Jo, the organization will have a logo and the campaign will have a different logo. And for the campaign materials, in every part of the campaign logo is dominant and the organizational logo is secondary or subservient, right? And then gradually, as the campaign is done, you what do you call it? You let the campaign logo go, right?
A good graphic designer will integrate not always literally your existing logo. They'll look at the font you're using. They're going to look at the colors you're using. They're going to look at what your logo is and what your goals for your campaign are. And they're going to create a logo that is not going to clash, but that's going to go with, they know that your campaign logo is going to be on your website that has your organizational logo. So they're not going to create it in a vacuum if you're working with a professional. So
And here, Amy, I have one more thing I'd like to go back to. Cynthia Herrera wrote this earlier and it caught my attention. She says, I find myself, when we were talking about emails and writing and professionalism and, stuffiness or non-stuffiness, she said, I find myself reading emails, trying to figure out whether they are personal or boilerplate, mass emails. If I think they're personal, of course, I feel like I should respond. Personal language makes all the difference. It is a magical ability that you can learn to be able to write mass emails that feel personal. It really is remarkable. You look at people who write really well, they can make emails they send to a whole lot of people feel like they were sent to you. And it is a skill worth having. So by all means, study. When you see one that's really good, Cynthia and everyone else, when you see an email that you're going to respond to, notice why it's so good. Notice what caught your attention about it.
And if you have to ask yourself, is this a bulk email? Then it's you
good.
Know.
It's good. Exactly.
Yeah, very frequently I'll think this is to me. And then I'm like, why would they be writing to me? And, you look around and then there's the unsubscribe button right at the very, very bottom.
There's actually a guy, Amy and I know him both, and periodically he asks a whole bunch of people in the field for information that he's going to put together in some kind of a blog post. And he sends an email that seems very personal, right? I mean, totally feels personal. And then I'll get an email from Amy, or I'll send her the email, forwarding it. They say, Amy, did you get that? Right? Did you get this email? She said, yes. So we catch him at his game. Right?
But you know what? It gets our attention.
It works. Yes, I'm not being critical of that. It just is funny. It makes me laugh every time.
All right. Excellent. Listen, guys, we don't want to keep you past the hour. It's been a great conversation, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week as well. Somebody's asking about the recording of this talk. Just send an email to support@capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. support@capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. You'll get the recording, but you can also go to your podcast app and look for All About Capital Campaigns. So please do subscribe to the podcast, All About Capital Campaigns, and give us a 5-star rating. And we'll see you next week. Have a great week.
5-star rating, not perfect, right? Not because it's perfect, but because it's full of energy. We certainly are that, Amy.
Excellent. All right, guys. Take care.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.